We open a case file tonight on a small Nova Scotia town that held its breath for nearly a month and never fully exhaled again. It was a Friday night in October. A 19-year-old woman said goodnight to her friends outside a pool hall on a downtown street she had walked 100 times. She had a plan. She had someone waiting for her. She had her whole life in front of her. Amber Kirwan never made it home. What followed was one of the most gripping criminal investigations in Pictou County history. A weeks-long search, a community plastered with 70,000 posters, a wall of candles that grew longer every day, and eventually, a shallow grave in the woods that answered the worst question and opened 100 more. Tonight, we open the file from the beginning. Discovery New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. Population just over 9,000. The kind of town where people know each other's names, their parents' names, where they went to school. In the fall of 2011, it was the kind of town where a 19-year-old woman disappearing from a downtown street in the middle of the night was not just a tragedy. It was a wound that ran through the entire community. Amber Kirwan was 19 years old. She was a student at the Nova Scotia Community College campus in nearby Stellarton, where flags would later be flown at half-mast in her memory. She was the kind of person her community recognized, not just as a name on a poster, but as a daughter, a classmate, a face they had seen around town. On the evening of October 8, 2011, Amber went out with friends to Dooley's Pool Hall in downtown New Glasgow. It was an ordinary Friday night. She was having a good time. At approximately 1:30 in the morning on October 9th, Amber left the pool hall. She had arranged to meet her boyfriend, Mason Campbell, but Campbell had asked her to come to a convenience store down the street rather than the pool hall itself. He would later testify that he had been drinking, that he had been impaired, and that he had been worried about police presence near Dooley's because he was driving without insurance or valid registration. He was waiting for her at Big Al's convenience store. Amber never arrived. When Campbell realized she wasn't coming, he assumed she had found another way home. He went home himself. It wasn't until later that the alarm was raised. Amber Kirwan had not come home. Within days, the search began in earnest. 70,000 posters bearing Amber's photograph were put up across Pictou County and beyond. Volunteers from search and rescue teams combed fields, roadsides, and wooded areas. A community Facebook group titled Pictou County, Amber Kirwan Homicide, Open Discussion, Facts and Opinion, drew more than 2,600 members who tracked every development, debated every theory, and circulated every rumor. And on a wall in downtown New Glasgow, directly across the street from Dooley's Pool Hall, something else was growing. Candles, flowers, cards, notes. People who had never met Amber came and left something behind. The stretch of wall grew to more than 20 meters. It became known simply as Amber's Wall. The community hoped, the community prayed. And as October wore on, that hope began to fracture. On Saturday, October 29th, 2011, nearly 3 weeks after Amber disappeared, police executing a search warrant arrived at a wooded farm property off Heathbell Road in the small rural community of Heathbell, approximately 30 minutes from New Glasgow. Volunteers and RCMP officers had already searched this area once before. This time, they had new information. In a wooded area on the property, investigators found human remains. They were in a shallow grave. The following day, November 6, 2011, the RCMP and New Glasgow Police Service confirmed what the community already feared. The remains were those of Amber Kirwan. The cause of death was not publicly released. But investigators were clear. This was a homicide. In a statement released that Sunday morning, Amber's family wrote, "It is with overwhelming sadness and grief that our worst fears were realized. Our beloved Amber will not be coming home to us. Words cannot express the sorrow and sense of loss we feel." They thanked the people of New Glasgow and Pictou County. They thanked the police and search and rescue teams, and they asked for privacy. At Amber's Wall, people gathered again, not to hope in this time, to mourn. The investigation from the moment Amber's remains were found, investigators knew this was not a random act. The shallow grave, in a rural location 30 minutes from where she was last seen, indicated planning or, at minimum, local knowledge. Someone knew that stretch of Heathbell Road. What police did not say publicly at the time was that this particular road carried its own dark history. Heathbell Road had been the scene of another violent crime more than a decade earlier. That connection would prove significant. In the days and weeks following the discovery of Amber's remains, Investigators assembled a picture of the last known hours of her life, from witness testimony, cell phone data, and text message records. The Crown would later present much of this material at trial, tracing a detailed timeline of the night of October 8th and into the early hours of October 9th. One witness whose movements became central to the investigation was a man named Christopher Alexander Falconer. At the time of Amber's disappearance, Falconer was 31 years old and living in the New Glasgow area. He was known to some in the community, and his name emerged early in the investigation. Text message records showed that on the evening of October 8th, Falconer had been in contact with a woman named Jerika Ibrahim, someone he knew socially. That evening, she had invited him to come over. He had responded that he was feeling low. He came to her home around 9:30 that night, stayed briefly, and left before she went out for the night. After she returned home, she texted him again. He did not come back that night. What Falconer did in the hours after leaving Ibrahim's home was the central question of the investigation. Cell data and witness testimony placed Falconer in the vicinity of downtown New Glasgow in the early morning hours of October 9th, the same window in which Amber Kirwan was walking away from Dooley's pool hall. There was more. Text messages between Falconer and his stepsister, Alice Meyer, confirmed that in the early hours of October 9th, Falconer had gone to her property and left items in a camper trailer kept there. That property was near Heathbell Road, the same road where Amber's body would be found weeks later. Investigators also found something in Falconer's car, a bloody tank top. Forensic analysis determined that the garment carried DNA from both Christopher Falconer and Amber Kirwan. Fabric analysis conducted by a textile and fiber expert would later confirm a match between a piece of black cloth found inside that same camper trailer and a sweater Amber Kirwan had been wearing on the night she disappeared. Amber's remains and the clothing found with them had been buried close to his stepsister's home. When investigators began questioning people close to Falconer, Ibrahim came forward with something that deepened their suspicions. She told police that Falconer had asked her to lie about his whereabouts if police came to question her. She testified to this in court. He had also, she said, asked her to provide a false alibi for the hours in question. Falconer's parole was revoked in February 2012 after police suspicion reached sufficient threshold to act. He was, at the time, on parole from an earlier conviction. He was returned to custody. 3 months later, in May 2012, while housed at the Dorchester Institution in New Brunswick, Christopher Falconer was formally charged with the first-degree murder of Amber Kirwan. He pleaded not guilty. The trial of Christopher Alexander Falconer opened in January 2014 at the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia in Pictou, the county seat, a short distance from New Glasgow. 13 jurors heard evidence over the course of 3 weeks. Amber's parents, Marjorie and Don Kirwan, were present every day. The Crown's case was built on a framework of forensic evidence, digital records, and witness testimony that, taken together, placed Falconer in the right place at the right time, with physical connections to the victim that investigators argued could not be explained away. The bloody tank top with mixed DNA, the fabric fiber connecting the trailer to Amber's sweater, the text messages placing Falconer near Heathbell Road in the early hours of October 9th, the request relayed by Ibrahim that she lie to police, the burial site located near property connected to Falconer's own family. Forensic testimony also established that Amber's system contained codeine at the time of her death. Despite this, evidence presented at trial indicated she had, in the words of the Crown, vigorously defended herself against her attacker. The nature and detail of that testimony was not released in full to the public, consistent with the family's wish for privacy and the clinical discretion applied by the court. The defense challenged the jury instructions, arguing that the trial judge had not properly directed jurors on how to weigh certain expert evidence, including the toxicology findings. Defense lawyer Mike Taylor maintained throughout the proceedings that there were grounds for reasonable doubt. After 7.5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with its verdict: guilty first-degree murder. Nova Scotia Supreme Court Justice Nick Scaravelli sentenced Christopher Alexander Falconer to life in prison with no eligibility for parole for 25 years, the mandatory sentence for a first-degree murder conviction in Canada. When the verdict was read, Marjorie Kirwan began to sob. Outside the courthouse, She told reporters she was very pleased with the verdict. She said nothing more. Crown Attorney Bill Gorman was careful in his words. He told reporters that Amber's family would never fully recover from her death, that their sense of relief in that moment was real, but that this was a tragedy they would carry forever. It was also revealed, after the verdict, that this was not Falconer's first conviction for murder. In 1998, Falconer had pleaded guilty to second-degree murder after he and another teenager killed a taxi driver. That killing had taken place on Heathbell Road, the same stretch of rural road in Pictou County where Amber Kirwan's body was found 13 years later. His criminal history had not been placed before the jury during the trial. The symmetry of that geography was not lost on investigators or on the community. For the aftermath following his conviction, Christopher Falconer filed an appeal. He argued, through legal counsel, that the trial judge had made an error in how he instructed the jury, specifically that instructions on the weight to be given to certain admissible evidence had conflated two distinct legal standards, potentially misleading the jury about their function. In March 2016, the Court of Appeal of Nova Scotia dismissed the appeal. The court ruled it was not satisfied that the trial judge had committed a reversible error and that Falconer had received a fair trial. The conviction stood. Christopher Falconer remains incarcerated, serving his life sentence. He will not be eligible for parole for 25 years from the date of his conviction. For the people of New Glasgow and Pictou County, the verdict closed one chapter. But grief of the kind that follows the violent death of a 19-year-old girl, a girl who was walking home from a pool hall on a Friday night, does not close on a schedule. Amber's wall stood long after the trial ended. The candles burned. The notes remained, 70,000 posters. Weeks of searching. A community that never fully stopped looking, even after there was nothing left to find. Amber Kirwan was 19 years old. She was a daughter, a student, a person known by name in the kind of town where that still meant something. She left a pool hall at 1:30 in the morning and she never made it home. A jury decided what happened to her. An appeals court confirmed it. Christopher Falconer was found guilty and has remained in custody since. And yet, as is true of every case we open, there are questions that no verdict fully answers. Questions that live in the spaces between facts. What happened in those early morning hours on Heathbell Road? What Amber endured? Whether justice, in its legal form, is ever sufficient measure for what was taken. The courts have spoken. The file has a name written in it. But for the Kirwan family, and for the people of New Glasgow, who lit candles across 20 meters of wall and waited, the kind of closure a verdict brings is its own complicated thing. Until the weight of that loss becomes something Amber's family can lay down, and perhaps it never fully will, her case and her memory remain open. Every case leaves something behind. This one left a wall full of candles in a small Nova Scotia town that still remembers her name.